Hey, well,
Two, are you?
doctor, how are you, sir?
Hey Travis, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's very good to talk to you. I have to tell you, you're and again, I don't know how much hands-on this is for you, but the website that the Department of Psychology at Radford University has up with the kind of the statistics for serial killers has been a huge help to our show every single month. And this month I was like, I really got to talk to the guy that's kind of responsible for that. So I tip my cap to you and to all your students there.
I appreciate that, and I'm glad to hear it's useful.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and it's one of those things where I'm curious where the kind of there's like the trifecta that they talk about in your formula, the arson, the animal abuse, the abuse from family. But where did you guys get the idea for kind of how to outline a serial killer and kind of draw a blueprint for all these guys?
Well, it took some time certainly to do that. It's been probably 25 years since we first started collecting data, and we started collecting data because there really just wasn't really very good information. There were certainly a lot of things written about serial killers, but not really a lot of good data. And so we started to do some reading and look at the type of variables that we thought might be interesting. And then over the years, we've gotten rid of some. We've added quite a few. We've certainly learned a lot more over 25 years than we knew 25 years ago.
So originally, before you even became a professor or anything else in that field, what originally kind of attracted you to the subject of serial killers? Or did anything attract you, or is it just kind of a side thing for you among the other studies that you've done?
Well, it was kind of happenstance. I'm an industrial psychologist by training, and my department chair came up to me and said, "You do some work with police, right?" And I said, "Yep." And he said, "Well, that's close enough. You're going to be teaching the forensic psychology course in the spring." And didn't really know much about forensic psychology. Started to do a little bit of work. Saw that serial killers might be an interesting topic, and so it started really as just trying to prepare for a new class. Kind of turned into a good line of research, just because again we just didn't really know very much information, and the students had lots of questions, and I wanted to give them good answers. And so it started off with from a class lecture, it went to some class projects, and then it's just been 25 years of data collection.
Back in February, we actually talked to a professor who of psychology, of course, that had never done anything on serial killers, but he was approached to work on a book about the Zodiac. And, of course, he didn't know that he was even getting into a book about the Zodiac. And he starts compiling data, and he's kind of doing a psychological profile of the Zodiac killer, and he realizes who he's doing it on at that point. But he didn't have any kind of background in the field, but you did, or at least in police work. So can you kind of talk about what you were doing when they approached you for that? You did talk about the police work that you were doing, or at least loosely.
Right. I was working with police departments to help them select and train their officers. So we helped them develop a battery of tests and structured interviews to be able to hire officers, and then started doing some teaching at the academy on things such as eyewitness testimony, understanding aggression, and then some industrial psychology topics such as evaluating police performance, and also, again, just how to select police officers. So it was very, very different from the forensic psychology context.
So at that point, when you started doing the forensic psychology, did people ever, and maybe you had already been approached this way, but had you been approached about specific cases? Is there anything like that had come up during that time?
It didn't. The type of work we do, we certainly don't do profiling, and I would say that we're experts on serial killer statistics, but not necessarily on serial killers per se. So, for example, I'm not a person who's going to go to a prison and interview a serial killer, be in contact with them. So I think there are plenty of people out there who can do that role and who enjoy that role. What we found that was missing was really just more the data and the nuts and bolts, the kind of things that most people find pretty boring.
Actually, I think that's one of the most interesting parts about it. And I know a lot of people, I guess you're kind of taking away the face of it when you're just doing statistics. But, I look at it like this, and maybe you see it the same way. If you can gather up the same statistics about 10 different people and they're all pretty similar, then maybe you're still doing just as good a work as the psychological profile that they do.
Well, that's one of the really interesting things I think that we found in our research really is that there really isn't a profile for a serial killer. And if you really look at the different types of serial killers, for example, look at their motives or look at their victim types, there are just so many different types that you really almost have to break them down into those very different types to try to see if there's a profile in common even for a particular type. So I think that's one of the things that I was surprised at initially, but it's been maybe one of our bigger contributions.
And, as far as statistic gathering, for people who maybe haven't seen the website like I have, and to be honest with you, that's almost a weekly thing for me. I check out the website, just looking for different people that we should talk about on a monthly basis. So that's me. But when you all are gathering statistics, can you kind of talk about some of the key categories that you're looking for there?
Sure. We start off by just some of the basic demographics. So for the serial killers, we're going to look at things such as their gender, their race, their age. We'll look at things such as their background in terms of how they were raised, their education, whether they had a criminal history, whether they had been in the military or not. So just as much as whether they had been abused as children. So all the background information we can get, and then we go ahead and collect data then on the actual crimes themselves. So in terms of the weapons that are used, the gender and race and age of the victims, whether or not the person tried to hide their crime, and then we have another series of data that we look at in terms of once they've been caught, things such as the date they were arrested, the sentence they received, whether or not they pled insanity or not, and then what the final sentence was.
Now, a lot of people think of their idea of what a serial killer is and, the different characteristics of a serial killer. But when you guys gather those statistics, do you kind of see parallels between a lot of these people? I know there's a lot of people that would think they do right off the bat, but is there typical parallels that you see, or are these things, you see one that's completely out of the blue, has nothing to do with any of the others? A lot of people say Ted Bundy's so much different than the rest, that type of thing.
Yeah, and I think Ted Bundy would be a great example, because if you look at Ted Bundy's background, there's really nothing there that's going to suggest that this person would be a serial killer. Where if you contrast that to somebody such as Arthur Shawcross, who was the Genesee River killer, anything that could go wrong in this guy's life occurred. So almost everything we talked about in class, the child abuse, for example, exposure to chemicals, this guy had happened to him. And so I think those are good contrasts of two very different types of people who both became serial killers. And I think if you look across, let's say, 30 serial killers, you really get 30 very different stories. The two things that you probably see most in common, even though, again, it's certainly not 100%, is a history of abuse as a child, and then some type of head injury or neurological damage. But again, those are the two most common, but certainly not every serial killer has those characteristics.
So in your time, kind of compiling these statistics, are there any other names out there that kind of stood out to you as far as just being abnormal? Of course, Bundy, we talked about, he's the one that a lot of people think of, but are there any others that really come to mind right off the bat that are like, wow, I tell you what, this just does not fit the mold of what we've seen so many times before?
Not necessarily, because I think every timeline that we've done or the students have done, and let me kind of maybe explain that a little bit, is part of the forensic psychology class. What the students will do is they'll get in a group of about 3 or 4 people, and we'll assign them a serial killer that we haven't done a timeline on. And what they'll do is go back and research the serial killer, looking at true crime books. They'll look at newspaper articles. They'll try to see if they can get any type of court information, and then start from that killer's birth, work their way through childhood up to the time of the crimes, and then again after the arrest, and then see if they can try to really tie into does this person have the classic symptoms, so to speak, that you always hear about? And what amazes me is, again, you read 30 timelines, you've got 30 very different stories. The abuse, again, that's something that's going to be common in there. Certainly a criminal record early on is going to be something that you're going to see, but very different stories.
And you talked about the students and what they do as far as that goes, but what as far as the students that take that go through that, I guess, class, what would generally be their major that you see most often? Is it criminal justice, or is it something like FBI? What kind of class or what kind of careers are they looking towards?
Typically, it's going to be criminal justice and then in psychology, and many of them start the course perhaps thinking of a criminal justice career in something such as the FBI. A lot of want to be profilers, but when we start the class, one of the things we do is talk a little bit about careers in forensic psychology. And the bad news that I gave them pretty early on is that they're not going to come out of school, join the FBI, and be a profiler. The career path for something like that is typically coming out, going local law enforcement for a number of years, then maybe working with a federal agency, spending a good number of years there, and then being one of 100 other people who are applying for an opening in something such as the behavioral science unit. So that's something I think that they're disappointed in hearing about. But one of the things we talk about is if you like this type of topic, if you like and again, I don't want to use the word profiling, but if you like studying these types of folks, certainly any type of job in law enforcement, especially as you work your way up and become a detective, you're doing that type of work. It's just not and so I think they feel a little bit more enlightened that maybe they can do these kinds of things down the line and not necessarily have to go through the FBI.
So I'm going to ask this, and I'm not really sure what I'm getting at, so let's see if I can kind of explain. Have you ever had a student that took your class and of course you don't have to name names or anything, or give even like too specific of an example, that took your class maybe for the wrong reasons, and the wrong reasons being, I don't know, because they're trying to learn about such things for the wrong reasons? I'm being very vague, I know, but I think maybe you can get where I'm going with that.
Yeah, I do, and in all the years I've taught the course, I can think of really only one student, and this is going back probably 20 years, that was just an odd kid, and the questions he asked in class, his fascination with the topic, made me think that he was taking it in a sense for the wrong reason. But otherwise, over the years, I think it's just been students who really enjoy the topic, especially now with all the different shows on TV. When I first started teaching the course, pretty much the only network that was really running anything on serial killers was A&E. And now you probably can't find anything on A&E on that topic, and there's all these other TV stations. But with the explosion in the media of the interest in serial killers, I think the students are coming to the class with some pretty good knowledge already, and they're excited about it.
What do you think it is that kind of interests society in serial killers so much? I mean, because even the people who are the most devout Christians and things of that nature, the quote-unquote good people of the world, are really just fascinated by this dark part of humanity, and some of us even have to kind of like not let people know that, because then they think there's something wrong with us.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? I think it's one of those that serial killers they're statistically unusual, right? Even though that we've got close to 4,000 now in the database, they're still statistically unusual. They're not something that we're going to encounter probably in our lifetime, and it's just really hard to comprehend how somebody can kill several people. And so I think that's really where the fascination comes from. It's the fact that, again, that it's not something we see every day, and it's just hard to comprehend. It's kind of like when you find maybe a mother who kills her children. You just can't understand how that could happen. I think those are the types of things that fascinate us, the things that we can't understand.
So in your position, has there ever been any kind of statistic gathering there, or anything that you've kind of been involved with, whether not professionally or professionally, where you're kind of looking at the facts and doing those things.